So let's get started. So before jumping into the text, I wanted to just remember some of the important things we did last week. So who can tell me what superimposition is? We are superimposing something. So who can tell me what are we doing?
So something seems like something. So like basically like the idea of the example that you gave of the rope seeming like a snake, or like any idea in our life that we perceive differently than what it is superimposing.
Right. And so to make it a little bit more abstract, that's so that it's applicable, it's like, so we are superimposing the qualities. So we are superimposed. So so do you remember what the qualities of the self is, or of the Atman is?
The self is Satchitanand.
What does that mean?
Like Satchit is basically, what do you say, ever shining? I'm not sure, not 100% sure.
Anybody? What are the qualities of the self? We kind of just got introduced to the idea in last class.
The gunas?
So the gunas are the qualities of the mind.
Existence, consciousness, and bliss.
Correct. So existence, consciousness, and bliss. And so those are the qualities of the self. And the superimposition, like Jayesh said, is we are superimposing the qualities of that onto something else, right? So the qualities that I exist, the qualities that stuff, or not even like the qualities of just knowing, the ability to know, or the ability to exist. Those are qualities of the self. So that is being superimposed on everything else, right? And similarly, the other way around. So what are the qualities of the other stuff? So what is the number one, I guess, completely pervading quality of everything that you perceive? What do you think it is?
Existence itself, like it exists. That's why we perceive it.
So that is the quality of the self. So
okay,
because
right.
the self exists, you can perceive stuff.
Everything.
But what is the qualities of the objects in this world?
Right.
Like, what are some of the qualities of the objects? Just for starters, they are temporary. They're impermanent.
Right.
Right. So they have a limited amount of existence. They exist for a while, and then they're gone. Or they don't exist, and then they exist, and then they're gone. So that's kind of like the property of everything that we see. So the reverse superimposition is the properties of the stuff of what we see, we superimpose on the self. So we think I am limited as well, or I am temporary as well, because time and those sort of limited properties, limiting properties, are properties of what you're perceiving. But because of this ignorance and because of this superimposition, we tend to superimpose the qualities of whatever we are perceiving on us. And similarly, actually, what is your real quality of the self? Existence, consciousness, that we superimpose on the stuff. So there's these two things going on. And so that's the superimposition. And so that's important to remember, that whatever we are perceiving, we are recognizing it, and then on whatever you're recognizing, you're perceiving qualities of permanence, which is why when things are not available or when they go away, we feel really sad, because we thought that it would be permanent. So if you can think of like relationships, if you can think of jobs that you really liked, if you can think of basically anything, right? Any sort of event in your life, you want to make sure, or any situation, we want to make sure that that's always there, because we feel very good when that situation is there or it's available to us. But when things change, we feel sad. And the idea there, what's going on is the situation by fundamentally is impermanent, right? Everything outside is temporary, so it is going to eventually go away. It's just that our misunderstanding, we think it is permanent, or we think it is, always shining, or it's always there. So that's this mutual superimposition that's going on. So that's kind of what we want to recognize, that this superimposition we are attributing to the stuff we perceive, properties of the self, and then the reverse, which is on the self, we are attributing properties of the stuff. So both things are going on. Cool. Anybody has any questions about this? Okay. So let's get into the text. Let me present my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Okay. All right, so who knows how to read the Sanskrit? I know Niladri does. You want to give it a shot, Niladri? Think you're muted.
Yeah, sure.
So we're on verse 25. And would somebody volunteer to read the English? Harsha, you want to do it? Okay.
Right. Atmanah Satchidam Shascha Buddhe Vritti Riti Dvayam Sanyojya Cha Viveken Janamiti Pravartate.
And the English?
By the indiscriminate blending of the two, the existence, consciousness, aspects of the self, and the thought wave of the intellect, there arises the notion of I know.
Cool. So here we're getting a sort of technical understanding of what happens when we perceiving objects. So like we learned previously, the property of the self is existence itself, or it is knowledge itself. So it's because of the self, you have the mind has the ability that it can know things, it can perceive things, right? So you can think of it as like the self is shining all the time. It does, like, it can shine on the mind, it can shine on objects, it can shine on everything that is being perceived. Now, because of this shining, things appear in our awareness. So, you're looking at this cup. So now you can see that, oh, there's a cup in my awareness. You're looking at a phone. Now you can see that there's a phone in my awareness. Now, because of whatever the objects being perceived, because of the recognition, there is a thought that occurs, which is, oh, I know that this is an object. I know that this is a cup. I know that this is a phone. Right? So these are basically consequences of recognizing what is appearing. So there's this feeling that, oh, I know that things are happening, right? So if you close your eyes and imagine, let's say a mango again. So imagine a mango. You can see the shape of a mango. So now the thought after you have imagined a mango, there's a feeling that, oh, I know that there's a mango in my awareness, right? So that feeling or that thought or the notion that I know is essentially a thought. And because of this thought, we can then have more thoughts. You can say, oh, I know this is a mango. And then you can now have another thought about the mango. And you can say, oh, this mango is raw, or this mango is ripe. This mango is sweet, or it is sour. Those are future following thoughts that you can have. But the first thought is always starts with I know, because that's the nature of the self. Like it is knowledge itself. It is through the self that you can then have these sort of other consequences of, like, I know, and I know X. So I know fill in the blank. So that's what this is, the technical aspect of it. And then when it says by indiscriminate blending of the two, we think that I know. And I here refers to like the mind or the ego, the limited self. But actually what is happening is, mango is passing by me, right? This self of identity is this false understanding, because there is no I in this, the small I there. There is the big I, which is the self, which is always shining, and it always knows, and it always exists. But because we think we are our limited mind, we think that the mind knows stuff. So here, not recognizing that you are always the self, the mind recognizes that this is a mango or this is a phone, and it has a second thought, which is, oh, the mind knows, so I know. So here, this verse is sort of alluding to that fact that we identify with the mind and believe that the mind is the one that knows. It's actually the self which is knowing all the time. And in front of the mind, or in front of the self, thoughts are flowing by. So, if you can think of the analogy that you're sitting on the bank of a river and watching the river flow by, that's what's going on. So your mind is like, the thoughts that are flowing by is like the water in the river. So there's thoughts that are going by, and you are seeing the thoughts of, there's mango, there's phone, there's cup, there's all these thoughts. And there is another thought along with that, which is, I know mango, I know cup, I know blah, blah, blah. And that is also a thought. But because of our false understanding, we believe that, the mind is the one that is responsible for this knowing. So that's kind of the technical meaning of this. And we'll get into more examples of what is the consequence of this. Does that make sense? Any questions about this verse? Okay. Let's do the next verse. Niladri, you want to do this?
Atmano vikriya nasti buddhir bodho na jatviti jivaha sarva malam yatva gyata drashtate muhyati.
Atma never does anything, and the intellect of its own accord has no capacity to experience. I know. But the individuality is in us due to delusion thinks that it itself is the seer and the knower.
Okay, so in the previous verse, we sort of had this idea that, there's something, there's some false understanding happening, which is like this indiscriminate blending. And here we are given as to like why, the intellect is not the one that actually knows things. So the intellect and all of the stuff that is perceived is essentially, in this literature, in this philosophy, we call all of the stuff as prakriti, which means like matter. So there's this idea that this whole world is made up of matter, and there is, spirit, or, Atman, or, the self, that is, illumining all of this matter. So the source of life is within the self, and everything outside that is being perceived is, in some words, inert. And I think the word they may use here is jada for inert. Okay, I guess there is no word inert here, but essentially what this is alluding to is that this whole world is actually inert, including the mind. It's inert. It's through the power of the self that the mind has the ability to function. So in this verse it says, the Atman never does anything, and the intellect on its own accord has no capacity to experience I know. So so if you think of intellect as something that is separate from the self, the intellect is illumining stuff. The Atman is illumining stuff, and the intellect is recognizing whatever is being illumined. So the intellect also is sort of an experience that we have. So if you can do the math, computation, 10 plus 10 equal to 20, right? So that's if you close your eyes and think about that, that's a thought being illumined as well. And you can also see that your mind is able to solve that problem. So even that is being illumined. So here, the verse is saying that because of this ignorance, we think that we are the mind. So this is hammering the idea that the mind is separate from us and is also inert and is also an object in our perception. And the Atman is actually the one that is full of power. It's the source, and it's through the Atman that the intellect is alive, the mind is alive, it's able to think. So here we're given the two words, seer and the knower. So you know, the qualities of the Atman was existence and knowledge. So because of existence, you can be a knower of things, right? So since you have the property that the Atman can, you know, has the property of existence, the consequence of that property is you have the ability to experience things. And since the Atman has properties of knowing, the consequence of that is that you think that you are a knower, right? So the mind has this capacity to think that I recognize things, I know things, I experience things. And in that experience, when the mind is experiencing things or knowing things, there is another thought that occurs, which is I know, I experience, and I do. And that is also just a thought. But what happens is we believe that thought to be true, and think we are the knower and we think we are the seer. But actually, the Atman is the one that is doing it all. So the Atman is shining like the sun without preference. It's illuminating our entire world of experience. And in that entire world of experience, it's illuminating thoughts as well, which is thoughts like, I know, I experience, I do. And because of this ignorance, we identify with those thoughts. You know, thoughts like I do, I know, and we believe that we are the doer, we believe we are the knower. So so that's what this verse is alluding to. So if you go back to the analogy that we covered last week, which is, you know, of the projector, you know, if you are the light in the projector, there is you know, the projector is shining light, and then there's a film. So the film has like images on it, and then the light passes through this film, and these images are projected on a screen. And the screen, you know, finally you can see like a movie or whatever, like a you know, actual movie on the screen. So the Atman here is like the light, and all of your memories and your conditionings and all of that is the film on the screen. And each of us has a different film, because those you know, whatever the images on the film are based on our previous experiences. So when the light of this Atman shines through those images and on the film, this entire world of experience is illumined for us. So for example, when I see this copper bottle or whatever, somebody who has never seen this copper bottle will not think of it as a copper bottle, right? So because of my experience of recognizing that this is copper, I could be like, oh, this is a copper bottle. But for somebody who has never seen that would not even think that this is a copper bottle. So from their subjective viewpoint, they're having a very different experience than I am. Because in my experience, I'm saying, oh, it's copper, and all of my thoughts are going, and that's you know, building up my world. But your world could be very different because of the experiences that you have, and how those experiences shape what you're seeing. So in that analogy, the light is always shining, and you know, one of the images that you see is that, oh, I am experiencing stuff. So, you know, for example, if you're doing a project at work and you successfully do it, and then your boss comes and tells you, wow, you're doing, you know, amazing, or you're doing like a great job, you're so smart. Now a thought there may be a consequence to that thought, and you may say, oh, wow, I am doing so well. You know, I am, you know, so smart, right? It's a natural way to think about yourself and say those things, right? So you can say, I'm doing really well, I'm so smart. But actually what's happening is a thought, I am doing well, is going by. That's basically what's happening. It's going by. Just like there's a thought like, oh, this is a water bottle. That's another thought that goes by. Or, I'm feeling a little sleepy, or I'm feeling a little tired. That's another thought that goes by. But we tend to take one thought and think that is me. So a thought like, you are very smart, we grab onto that thought and be like, oh, wow, really? I am smart? So nice of you to say that. But if, or the opposite, which is like, you are, a stupid person. We take that thought and say, really? You think I'm a stupid person? But the quality of all thoughts are the same, or the property is the same. They're just going by. They're just flowing. The river is flowing in front of you, and you are always looking at the river. But because of our attachments and because of the power of certain thoughts, we tend to grab onto one of those thoughts. So somebody says, wow, you're such a beautiful woman. The dress that you're wearing is fantastic. And then you get identified with that thought because that's a very, it's a compliment. Everybody loves a compliment. And so you grab onto that thought. So now you say, oh, this person is complimenting me and I feel really good. So now I attach joy-producing properties to compliments. So now in the future, when I put the same amount of effort in, looking good or whatever, and if I don't get a compliment, I may feel bad, because now you will think, oh, am I not looking good anymore? Am I not as pretty as I was before? Am I not as handsome as I was before? So those are sort of these consequence of identifying with certain kinds of thoughts. So what we want to see is that no thought actually is special. It's just that we give certain thoughts more power than some other thoughts. So, you have, compliments and like, insults. Those are sort of thoughts that we attach a lot of power to, and because of which they affect us a lot more. But a thought like, oh, the weather is great today is a very neutral thought, because we have not given that thought a lot of power. But, you are, useless, or you are worthless, is somebody telling that to you is very powerful, because that directly, attacks your limited sense of identity or your mind, right? So somebody is commenting on the way you look, or somebody is commenting on the way you think. Those are sort of the ways we think of who we are. So those thoughts are very powerful. So that's what we want to start to see, that, the Atman is always shining on stuff. Good thoughts, compliments, insults, it's all going by in that river. What we want to not do is jump into the river and flow with the thought. Because when we do that, we are building this vasana again. So you remember we spoke about vasana, which is egocentric thoughts, which are thoughts that we give joy-producing properties to or misery-producing properties to. And and by flowing with the thought, we are basically giving more power to the thought. So when it happens in the future again, the same thing is going to happen, where you're going to get identified and triggered, and you will start to flow with the thought again. So what we want to do instead is sit back and, watch the river flow. So like my teacher says, don't just do something, sit there. So, we want to kind of take that into the real world. And it doesn't mean that you stop doing action, or you stop responding to situations and you become like, like a rock. That's not what it means. It's more about like, let's take a moment to not flow with the energy of the thought. Instead, sit back, let the energy pass by a little bit, and then do the action. Because from then, you're not going to identify with the thought that much. Does that make sense? Any questions about this? It's very important to understand this, this structure and the mechanics of what is going on, of what the Atman is, of who you are. And we want to remember to not make it like a concept. So we want to have the direct experience of who you are right here, right now. So, the self is always shining. So who sees the phone, for example? Like my teacher always does this. Who sees the phone? Like I see the phone, right? Like that's a direct experience. That is yourself. On top of that direct experience, we are superimposing all sorts of other things. You know, if you're feeling a little tired right now, you may say, I am tired. That is superimposition of the quality of the body on the self. If you're feeling, you know, high energy, that's again a superimposition of the body on the self. So you know, because of the language, you know, especially the English language, we tend to identify with whatever we are experiencing. So I am, you know, basically the way we want to look at it is like tiredness is going by, or, you know, high energy is going by. That's actually what is happening. You know, I am illuminating energy. I am illuminating, you know, lethargy. So that's kind of what is going on. But because of language, we tend to identify with whatever is being perceived. So that's what this verse is also alluding to. So we will get into more mechanics of this, but that's what we kind of want to keep noticing. This is a recognition. This is what is going on. It's just that we don't recognize that that's actually what is going on, which is you are always shining and illuminating things. And why do we want to notice that, and what does that give us? It gives us freedom from whatever is being perceived. Because if you can realize that you are not what is being perceived, that you are something beyond it, then you are free from the standpoint of that whatever is being perceived cannot affect you, because you know for a fact that whatever you're perceiving is not you. And, you know, and since it's something other than you, it is temporary, it's going to change, it's going to go away. So you take back the power, which you always have. It's just that you start to recognize that the power is always within you. So that's what we want to start to see, and that's what we want to start to develop. Questions about any of this?
Yeah, I have a question, Puneet.
Go ahead.
So, what? I guess why is it that, maybe why is not even the right question, but why is it that the self, that it takes so much effort to sort of detach the self from the intellect or any of these other, you know, different aspects where you have to meditate for hours and, you know, like whatever, however process it is, rather than that being the default and you can engage with these different things as and when you need it?
So this work describes the cause of ignorance as because of Maya is what they use. So why is not, like you said, it's very hard to know why. That's just the way the world has been created. Like there is this huge power that does not allow us to notice our essential nature, which is what you're alluding to, which is like, why isn't everyone born with this knowledge, or why isn't everyone realized from the get-go, right? It's because, I mean, this work says that there is a huge amount of vasana, or this egoistic impressions in us. And these egoistic impressions are created because of, you know, our identifications in this world, our attachments, our aversions, and those prevent us from seeing our essential nature. Like you are all here in class today because some part of you wants to be free and you want to get out. But there's a million other people who are not doing that, who are doing things out of the sense of compulsion, out of the sense of, you know, whatever it is, like they can't help themselves. So there is this huge power, right? Like being addicted to certain things, or those things are powerful, which is why it's very hard to get out of addictions, because there is so much power given to those objects, to those things in this world. And a lot of energy has to be spent in changing the mind. So, you know, so that's where the self-effort comes in, that you can, so you know, it would be a very pessimistic view to say, oh, everybody is doomed, you know, there's no, you're going to be, life is, you know, Buddha's teachings are life is suffering, right? That's a very pessimistic view of life. But the good news is that there is a way out, and the way out is by applying self-effort, which is, how do I change my habitual tendencies? How do I put some effort so that, you know, I'm not unconsciously continuing to do the things that I'm doing. I'm starting to get conscious of, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? You know, once you start to get a little conscious, then the energies, the unconscious energy that we are, continuing to maintain our sense of attachments and aversions will start to fade. So, so that's the work that we have to do. I don't know if that answers your question, but it is.
I mean, there may not be an answer to the question.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, so it's like asking why is the sun heat hot, right? Like that's the property of it, or like why does light travel at like certain speeds, right? Like that's just the nature of this world. So the nature of this world has this powerful property of ignorance, but it also has this powerful revealing property that it shows you who you are. It also hides who you are, but it also reveals. So it has both sides. So in some of in the Tantra, Kashmir Shaivism, which is like another philosophy, they talk about there's existence, consciousness, bliss. There's also two more powers, which is it has a revealing power and it has a concealing power. So kind of like the Vikshepa Shakti, but it also has this power of revealing. It has the power of revealing who you are, but then in moments it also has the power of hiding who you are. So it's the great power of this world. It's infinitely diverse, and which leads to so much diversity, right? So yeah, but there's no satisfying answer as to why. The question is like, it is like this, but what are you going to do about it, right? Is there a way to get out of it? Now that's a good question. So we want to try to spend our energies getting out. I mean, once you're out, you may try to like, come up with some answer and be like, okay, this is why it is. But, does it really matter at the point? Like, once you're out, you're out. Right. But good question. Any other questions? Okay, let's do the next verse.
Rajju salpa vadatmanam jivam jnatva bhayam vahet naham jivaha paratmeti jnataschenirbhayodbhavet.
Just as the person who regards a rope as a snake is overcome by fear, so also one considering oneself as the ego, jiva, is overcome by fear. The egocentric individuality in us becomes fearless by realizing that it is not a jiva, but the supreme self.
Cool. So one cool thing I like about this verse is it tells you the word for a snake, which is sarpa, which is very similar to the English word serpent. So there's some Indo-European language right there. Okay, so what is this verse saying? It's saying that because of this Vikshepa Shakti, which is this veiling power and this sort of projecting power, we don't recognize this the rope for a rope, and then we project that, oh, this is a snake. And because of that, there may be or actually there is this fear which first comes, right? So you're walking on the street and you see something that looks, which is actually a rope, but because of our fears, that is our first experience of like not recognizing what is it. And then there's this, our projection. So our projections are based out of fears and attachments. So because of you may be scared of a snake or something, so you're going to project this quality that this rope is actually a snake. And now you're overcome with fear. You're like, oh my God, I'm so scared of snakes. I don't know what to do. So now you're a little paralyzed and you start imagining all sorts of stories about snakes, about how, when you were young, you were like, really scared of snakes and all sorts of memories, right? So there's the mind being paralyzed and overcome with fear. And that's always, this is a very contrived example, but that happens all the time in this world where because of this fear from the past, we tend to be paralyzed and we're unable to do what is in front of us. Or maybe we're not paralyzed, but to some degree our mind is not as sharp or as available as it should be to be able to do the things that are in front of us. Why? Because we are thinking about something that happened in the past, or we're thinking about some future thing that could happen, and that's taking our attention away from the now. right? And that prevents us from doing the thing. So why is all of this happening? Because we're giving too much importance, or we're believing in the projections. So, the projection that this is a snake is not true in this case, but we are believing in that, and we're not analyzing and really seeing that it's a snake. Not to say that you should not believe whatever the mind says, but here the indication is that you should try to investigate and see, is that actually true? So the mind is is giving you this idea that, oh, this is a snake, could be a snake, right? You don't know yet. But instead of, before verifying that it's a snake, if you start to imagine all the things that could go wrong if it's a snake, then you're living in a dream world and you're not living in what is true. So what we have to do is we have to investigate and see that, oh, is this actually a snake? And if it's not a snake, then your entire sort of fear, the consequence of thinking it's a snake completely is gone, right? That entire story that you made up, that it's a snake, it's a python, or it's a a cobra, I saw its herd and it's poisonous. All those ideas and stories that you made up is completely dropped the moment you recognize that it's a rope. So instead of imagining and spending time thinking about what could go wrong, what we want to do is we want to recognize and see, is this actually true? Or is this just an idea or a fear that the mind is projecting? And this is where the gunas that we spoke about last week kind of come in. We start to see that all of our fears and attachments are based on the past. At some point in the past, I gave fear-producing properties to a snake for whatever reasons. Snakes could be scared. You may have gone to the zoo and then you got really scared of a snake, or you saw some really scary-looking picture, whatever it is. But in the past, some experience has led you to have fear giving properties to the snake in this moment. All we have to do is recognize that is what is happening. So once you see that it's a rope, the entire thing about the snake is gone. But then in that moment, what work that we also have to do is we have to remember and say, oh, I thought it's a snake. So what does that mean? It means that I still have this deep sense of fear, or some unexamined fear that I'm still holding on to. And just recognize it. And just stay with that feeling, and that fear or that initial sort of, energy that still sort of, that comes up in those moments will sort of fade away, because you are going to remain a little conscious in those moments. Not to say that your fear of snakes is completely going to go away in that experience, but in the future, when the same experience comes again, it may have a slightly less amount of energy. So we want to keep doing this until we get to a place where it's more manageable, and you don't sort of get overcome with fear, like this verse says. And what does that do? What is the consequence of doing this? You become fearless. So once you recognize that you are the self, you become fearless in life, because nothing in this world can actually harm you. Because whatever gets harmed and whatever gets destroyed is not you. Certainly a part of you, but it is not you. You are always shining. You are unattached, untouched by this entire world. And this is the recognition and this realization that occurs, that you are the Supreme Self. Supreme Self, why supreme? Because it is always shining, doesn't change. And that's what we are looking for. We are looking to recognize that we are always on, we are always there, we are untouched. Because fear is only a consequence of believing that you are this limited mind that comes up in front of us, and you don't like what you're perceiving. So we will continue to explore this idea. Any thoughts about this one? questions.
Hey, Puneet, just a quick question on what I understand Jiva means ego, but in the previous verse, where I mentioned individuality as Jiva also. I'm just trying to make I'm just trying, it's a new term, I guess, for me
Yeah.
here. Like I'm trying to make a distinction between how individuality is used here
Right.
and what egocentric qualifier individuality is. And yeah.
That's a good question. I didn't cover what Jiva is. So you could think of ego or Jiva as this limited sense of self. So actually in this work, we kind of divide the mind into, I would say, like 4 parts. So there's this, intellect, which is, the buddhi, which is our ability to think about things and like, solve problems. There is, I guess, manas, which is like the mind, which allows us to like feel emotions. It has some sense, some semblings of like, I guess, empathy and like things like that. And then there is chitta, which is our sense of memory. So all of our memories from the past, our memory of the body, there's all kinds of memories. So that's like, this other aspect of our mind. And then the 4th one is what is known as ahankara, which is this ego, which there's no actual English translation to it, but Western psychology translates it to ego, but ego is not a very precise word. It's this sort of word just used for like general, like, mind in many ways. But ahankara is very specific. It has this quality of, so ahankara is like, I think the Sanskrit is aham and kara. So it's something, it's aham is like I and kara is like doing stuff. So like it has a nature of I do, or I feel, or I know, this sort of very individualistic notion of like, oh, I am doing this work, the self of, when you do a project, you're like, oh, I did this project. Or like when you're drinking this water, like, oh, I am drinking this water. This notion of like this, you are this person, or the sense of I am this, or I am X, or I do X. So that's what is ahankara. And that's when our identity is. So you could, if you're a woman, you could say I am a woman. If you're a man, you could be like I am a man. So whatever you identify with, that is this limited sense of ego here. So if your identity is to your family, if you say I am this, then you would say I am, whenever your family members around you, you would feel like, oh, I am part of this is part of me. Or if you have some identity to the nation, you can be like, I am American, or I'm Indian, or I'm like, German, whatever your identity is. So that's like a global sense of a nation sense of identity. Or you can identify with this world. You can be like, I'm a human, or I am. So that's sort of how we want to look at ego here. So this individuality is this limited sense of identity that we hold on to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Cool. And this limited sense of identity is, I would say, the cause of a lot of our problems in this world. Because the moment you have a limited sense of identity, there is a consequence of me and the other. Right? So if you identify as this person, then everything that is not this person is other than you. So if you identify, your identity is with this nation, all the other nations are other than you and other than you, right? So if you identify with this entire universe, then there's no other, then there's just you. So which is why there is, there is a phrase in Sanskrit, which is aham brahmasmi, which means I am Brahman. And Brahman here is the word we use to describe consciousness, which is this universal sense of consciousness, whereas Atman is this individual sense of consciousness that you have within you. So, which So, that's the first sort of teaching of identity that we give, which we want to learn actually, which is I am this entire universe. So whenever you're doing any actions, you're not doing actions from this limited sense of identity. You want to do your actions from this universal sense of identity, because the moment you do actions from a limited sense of identity, then the qualities of like greed and like anger and those kinds of things are always a part of it, because you're bringing this limited sense of identity. But the moment you sort of start to break the barriers and expand a little bit more, you will start to see that there's more inclusiveness in the way you do your actions. So good question. So we want to see that there is this individual sense of identity. So whenever there's fear, there's always a fear that you as an individual are no longer going to exist, or you are going to somehow like you are threatened, right? So you can see the contraction of identity or this individual sense of self that happens when you are under threat or you're fearful. But when you're having a blast, when you're at a let's say you're with friends and hanging out, your sense of identity expands, because you don't no longer think of like you as a person. You get lost in the activity. So do you see that sense of like identity expanding, identity contracting? So like if you go and you're on stage and everyone's looking at you, your individual sense of identity sort of contracts, where you're like, oh my God, I am this person and now I got to look good, or they're looking at me. So you can kind of get a sense of that expanding and contracting too. There's this exercise that my teacher does in class. It's only useful when we are all in the same room, which is, everybody look at one person, right? The moment you have 20 people looking at you, you suddenly feel this very sense of awareness of like, wow, everyone's just looking at me. So in those moments, your individual ego is contracting, because you are now thinking, you're very aware that you're this body, and you're this, in that case, you're this body. But so you can see your individuality contract, or your ego contract. But in moments when you're lost in a project, your sense of like you're even a body kind of disappears, right? You're so engrossed in the task that you're doing. So we have these experiences, on a day-to-day. We just don't kind of notice it as much. But what this verse is saying, that there will come a point when you will break through and you will recognize that you are not this body, you are not your mind, you are not the intellect, you are something beyond it all. And that is the Supreme Self. And that's where freedom lies, because you are unattached. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, let's do the next verse.
Atmavabhasaya theko buddhya dini indriyanyapi deepo ghata divat swatma jade stainarva bhasyate.
Just as the lamp illumines a jar or a pot, so also the Atman illumines the mind, the sense organs, and so on. These material objects cannot illumine themselves by themselves because they are inert.
Cool. So here, this is the verse which has inert in this. So the word for inert is jada. I like the word jada. So here it's saying that, this entire world of at least in the physical world, this entire physical world is inert unless there is some sort of life in it, right? So like a plant, you could say, has life, but the bottle is lifeless, right? It's just matter. But the plant also has matter, but there's something other than matter in the plant that makes it not a lifeless plant, right? So there has to be something that is other than matter for it to be a piece of life. So what we want to start recognizing is that there is a part of us which is matter. Obviously there's a physical aspect of us which is made up of like our body is made up of all these matter. It's got like, all our organs. But then there is something other than those organs that make this body alive. Similarly, we have, we don't want to stop just at the body. We want to go one level closer, which is one level more interior to who we are, which is our mental nature. So we have emotions as well. Emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, excitement. They're all emotions that we experience, but they are also inert by themselves. Can you there's no way you can take out an emotion from your head and be like, this is an emotion, and it's alive by itself. It's because of the power of something inside us that we are able to experience emotions, right? A person who is dead, for example, cannot feel any emotions. This bottle cannot feel any emotions because it's inert. Similarly, our intellect, we want to recognize that, all of the things that we experience are inert, and it's through the power of the self that they appear to be moving, or they appear to dance in our experience. So that's kind of the implication here. So that's kind of what we covered before as well. Any questions about this? So everything that we perceive is inert. Only the self is actually alive.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this whole idea of self or life or Atman, if we are to ascribe to the notion that everything is one, Brahman, or whatever you want to go for, string theory, etc., whatever theory you ascribe to, why is it that only some things have this aspect of the self, and things that we generally consider inanimate or non-living do not have this aspect of this universal whatever force?
Yeah,
force?
it's a good question. So I don't want to just answer that question just yet because we're jumping ahead. But I promise you that question will be answered. Keep that question, hold on to that question. That question will be answered.
All right.
But one thing to remember is that it's not oneness so much. It's actually non-duality. So the thing about oneness is we tend to think that, oh, everything is the same. But that's actually not our experience, right? Everything is not the same. There's so much diversity in this world. Like, you seem to appear as a different person, like you are separate from me. I myself have like so many different aspects of me, which are, separate. I experience it as separate from me. So the reason why it's called non-duality and not oneness is because of this fact, which is things appear separate from me. I feel like I'm a subject, and there are all these objects. There are two things, right? For a subject-object experience, there has to be more than one thing. So it is recognizing that aspect of our experience, which is that there's diversity and there's multiplicity of things. But even though that is our experience, it is not diverse. It is one. So that's kind of how we want to look at it. And we will get into what that is. But it's not like, oh, everything is one. You and me are, the same in that way. It's not that. It's more like, okay, I see that you're separate from me, but it's not one. But it's not two. So the example we use is the snake and the rope, which is, but there's actually another example, which is, I'm kind of describing what the experience of, according to this work, is what the experience of a realized person. It's not like once you get self-realized, you will stop recognizing things in this world, or things will stop appearing separate to you. There will still be a sense of separation, but there is this deep knowledge or this deep understanding that even though they appear as separate from you, they are not separate. So the example that we use in this work is this mirage in a desert. You're driving a car, and you're on the road, and because of the heat and the sun shining, there appears in the distance that there's water, right? Like everyone's had that experience when you're driving on a highway and then you see water in the distance. And you think, oh wow, there's water, and I want to like go and stop and like maybe take a dip or something. But as you keep driving, the water never like really comes close, and it's always in the distance. And then you have this aha moment that, oh, it's actually not water, it's just a mirage, right? So your understanding that, oh, it's actually a mirage and not water is firm because of your experience. That doesn't mean that you stop seeing the water. It's like you stop recognizing it as water. You're just like, oh, it's mirage. So it's kind of like that, which is, even though you still continue to experience this world, you still continue to interact, and you still continue to do things, because of your deep experience and understanding, you stop recognizing it to be separate from you in that sense. So that's kind of the analogy there. But we will come to why, there's this, you think that this is not conscious as well. We will come to that. Any other questions? Okay, let's do. Did we do this verse? I forget. Yeah, we did this, right? Okay.
Swabodhe nani abodhecha bodha rupathyatmanaha na deepasya Deepecha yatha swatma prakashane.
A lighted lamp does not need another lamp to illumine its light. So too Atman, which is knowledge itself, needs no other knowledge to know itself.
So now this is recognizing that a doubt may appear, which is, in order to recognize the Atman, do I need something else? Like how would I recognize the Atman? And the answer to that question is that you don't need any other thing to recognize the Atman. So the analogy and the example here they've used is like, if there is a light shining, you don't need another light to shine and say, oh, there is a light shining, right? To recognize that there's a light shining. The fact that the light is on is enough to give you the experience that there is a light there. So similarly, the Atman is the reason why you're able to know things. So, if I ask you, do you exist or do you know things? What is your answer? Your answer is yes. Or at least like I experience things. Like my current experience right now is I am experiencing this class. When you go to sleep, your experience is I'm sleeping. When you're doing whatever activity, you're always experiencing something. It's constantly changing, but you're always experiencing. Now, do you need something else to tell you that you're experiencing something? Do you? No, right? Like it's the property of you through which you can experience things. You don't need to, drink a special drink every morning to suddenly start experiencing things. It's like the nature of you is to experience things, and the nature of you is to know things. It's self-revealing in that way. So there's this beautiful word in this literature called Swayambhu, which means self-illumining. So the self is self-illumining. It is shining all the time. It's always on. So that's actually a real problem, is because it's always on. Because it's always on, we take it for granted. And we don't recognize it, because the way we learn things is by seeing something and by not seeing something. So by, it's called comparing and contrasting. You really love chocolate because when you're eating it, it tastes very sweet. Now it's not there. So you know that there is chocolate, which is really good. So because of your experience of when you are experiencing the chocolate and your experience right now, which is not experiencing chocolates. So you can like think about how did it feel when I was experiencing the chocolate? It felt pretty good. So, you know, I like chocolate, right? So that's kind of what you can do. But with the self, you cannot do that. There is no moment when you are not on. You are always on. So you cannot have a lack of experience of the self. And that's why we don't recognize it. It is so obvious. It is so close to, I mean, it's always there. Like, when are you not you? But the problem is, on this direct experience of the self, we superimpose and we attribute properties of whatever we are experiencing and say, I am sad, I am unhappy, or I am happy, or I am miserable, or I am tired, I am energetic. Those are all properties of something, not you. But you are all, so the property of you is to recognize. So your property of you is to know that you are seeing low energy or high energy or whatever you're experiencing. So that's kind of what is going on. So here, you don't need anything else to recognize yourself. Yourself is self-illumining. Swayambhu is the word. I love that word. You know, you need nothing else to recognize it. All you need to do is withdraw your attention from stuff. Because right now, your mind is like, you know, if you're lying down and looking at the sky and you want to see the blue sky, you cannot see it because there's too many clouds. The sky is always blue. Or, you know, or at least when actually the sky is colorless, but because of the sun, during the day, the sky is always blue. It's just that the clouds come over and hide that aspect of it. So that's kind of how the nature of you. So because of these, our attention is always on the stuff, on the thoughts, on our feelings, on our physical pain. Our attention is always on stuff. And because of our attention there, we are not able to perceive our nature, our real nature. So that's why the practice is given to, like, you know, withdraw your attention from the world. And what does that do? That basically, you know, causes the clouds to dissipate a little bit, dissipates a little bit. And when the cloud dissipates a little bit, for a moment, you may see, oh, blue sky. That's kind of how we want to, that's kind of our experience of the self. For a moment, there will be a flash of like, oh, there was, you know, this flash of like extreme emptiness and there was nothing there, which was just pure consciousness, pure existence. And in those flashes, the nature of the self is revealed, because it's not, our attention is not on the cloud, or it's not on the objects. Our attention is on the source, which is who is it or what is it that is perceiving this all. So that's kind of how we want to think about this. Does that make sense? Okay, let's maybe do one more. Yeah, I think this is a good verse to end the class. Oh, Niladri is back. Niladri, do you want to help me read the the 30th verse?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, my computer had died.
Okay. Glad you're back.
Nishidhya nikhilo padhi neti netiti vakyatah vidya daikyam mahavakye jivatma paramatmanoh.
By the process of negation of the conditioning upadhis, as per the scriptural statement, it is not this, it is not this. The oneness of the individual soul and the supreme soul, as indicated by the great Mahakavyas, has to be realized.
Cool. So you know, the meditation that we've been doing, which is subject-object discrimination, is actually comes from this the scriptural statement, which is neti neti, which means not this, not this. So because you are always shining, and because our nature of our mind is to believe whatever we are seeing, what practice that we are given is we have to look at whatever we are seeing, and the process is to negate whatever you're seeing. So if you're seeing a memory from the past, I am not this memory. If you're seeing some future plan that you're like really worried about, I am not that future plan. So like that's sort of the practice. So like when you're in meditation, closing your eyes, you're experiencing physical sensations, you're experiencing mental thoughts and vibrations, you're thinking about memories in the past, you're thinking about stuff in the future. And what is the practice that we need to do? We have to negate, in the sense negate, you just have to recognize that you are not the memory, you are not the thoughts, you are not the emotions, you are not the physical sensations. So you're negating whatever is these objects in your experience. And this is, this comes from this is a practice that is written in the Upanishads, which is the source material for all of this work. The great Mahavakya here is Tat Tvam Asi, which means you are that. And you here is the Atman in you, is that Brahman, which is the infinite consciousness. So this is the first teaching that is given by the teacher, which is you are that. You are not this mind, this body, or this intellect that you think you are, that you've believed for lifetimes, if you believe in your past lives. But in this entire life that you've been alive, you've been told constantly by this world that you are your mind, you are your body, you are your personality. But this new teaching is given. You are that. You are not whatever you believed in. You are the infinite consciousness. So you are that. And then the second teaching is I am Atma Brahma, like what the book says. So this Atman is Brahman. So the Atman, so the teacher is now saying the Atman that is in me is Brahman. And the Atman in you is also Brahman. So that's sort of this sort of process that you're going through, which is you're finally arriving to the fact that you are infinite consciousness. And the way we get there is by not identifying with stuff that is being perceived. So we constantly doing this process of, I am not this, I am not my mind, I am not my body, I'm not my intellect, I'm not my emotions, even though they are appearing, not to deny or suppress anything that appears, but it's just recognizing that you are not any of those things being perceived. And by this recognition, the power that those things have that tend to take us away from this clear recognition that you are the witness of it. The power that you're sitting on the bank and noticing the river, suddenly a thought will come that will pull you into the river. It's like you're sitting there enjoying the river and this hand comes and pulls you into the river, and now you're all into the river and you're flowing with it. So we want to negate that. So if you can, it's a very hard process and it requires a lot of attention and requires a lot of energy as well, because it is so easy for the mind to just believe in what it's perceiving and flow with that thought. And then next thing you know, you've been thinking about something for like 20 minutes and then you come back in your meditation. I don't know if you've had that experience in meditation where you're saying, okay, I'm the subject, I'm the object, I'm the subject, that's very good. But then moment some memory comes or some thought appears, you kind of start flowing with that thought. And now you're thinking about planning your next vacation or something, right? And then you're gone. So we want to keep, be extremely alert, be aware, and you're whatever is coming through, you are recognizing that it's coming in your experience, but you are not this. I am not this thought. I am not this emotion. I am not this memory. And through this process, there will be a moment when there is a gap between one thought finishing and one thought beginning. And in those moments, in those gaps is where the nature of yourself is revealed in its purest form. And that's what we kind of have to pay attention to. We will practice that in the meditation. So any questions about this? This is a very important, this is like the core of the teaching. We've come to, I think this is almost at some point in the middle of the book. So we are given, so far we have been continuously being hammered at the idea that you are something other than the body, other than the mind. There's something in you that's other than this inert matter that our body and mind is made up of. Our mind is also inert. So you are something other than it. And the way to get to the source is to negate or disidentify and not believe in whatever is being perceived through this practice of I am not this, or it is not this. So it is not this, so what is not this? I am not this. I am that which is perceiving all of this. So, and you're never going to experience you as an object. You're not going to see yourself as like, oh, this is the self, because that you're always the self. It's always on. So all you can do is remove everything else. You can never, add something and recognize it as yourself. All you have to do is remove everything that is not self, which includes your thoughts, your minds, your emotions, everything. And when your mind is extremely quiet, in those moments, the self, the nature of the self will be revealed to you. And there will no longer be any doubt about whether you are existence, consciousness, or whatever. This will be your direct experience. And then you can describe it in your own words, and you can write your own Upanishad. Cool. So any questions about this? If you understand this process, you are 95% of your work is done. So this is very important, this practice of subject-object discrimination, and what is it that we are trying to do, and why are we doing it? What is the consequence of this practice? So think about that in your next week, this next week, and see if you clearly can answer those questions of like, what is this practice? Why am I doing it? What am I going to get it? And why is the process about negation? Because if you understand that, then the entire teaching becomes very easy, and the practice also becomes very easy. Okay, any thoughts before we move on to a meditation? No? Okay, cool. So I will stop sharing my screen, and let's do a quick meditation. Okay, so everybody close your eyes. Sit in a comfortable position. You want to make sure that your back, neck, and head are in a straight line. Your head feels rested on your body. So you can maybe rock it a little forward or backward, just so that it feels balanced and not strained. Just start by taking a few deep breaths. You want to take these long, conscious breaths. And on the exhale, just release all of the stress and emotions and thoughts that you're holding on to. Just relax. Just settle into your body. And while you're doing that, you can get a sense that your breath is an object in your perception. You can feel the breath just like you can see an object or see a lamp. We want to recognize that no matter what is going on in this world, we are always the witness of everything that is being perceived. And we always have this ability to withdraw our attention, or at least stop flowing with thoughts or the experience in this world, and just recognize that you are the witness. And what this does is that it pulls you out of the flowing river and you get back to the bank. And you can do this at any time during the day, not just in your meditation. It's like a pause button. So if there's thoughts that are happening, if there's physical sensations that are happening, you're feeling emotions, recognize that you are the subject. And those thoughts automatically fade away. And before the next thought begins, may happen to you that you may notice that there is a gap between one thought ending and the next thought beginning. And you may recognize that. And you may think, oh, this is a gap, but that is also a thought. So try not to conceptualize your experiences by just notice them without words, just noticing in silence. We want to start paying attention to who is it that is perceiving all of this. So see if you can see, or you can introvert your attention, like my teacher says. Introvert your attention to the source of what is it that allows me to perceive all of this. See if you can get a sense of just this space. This it's kind of like a sky, empty sky. Maybe there's a sky with clouds, but there's this context, this substratum to the experience of thoughts. There's always a context in which these thoughts appear. And from this context, they appear, and into this context, they disappear. We want to start to recognize that this context feels like empty space or like sky of consciousness. Even if your mind is very active and you're constantly thinking of thoughts, they are all appearing, or they are all being born from this context. And when the thought ends, it goes back into this context. You want to start recognizing that. If you get lost in thought, good practice is to remember that it is not this. I am not these thoughts. I am not these memories. Keep remembering to apply this practice of negation. You're negating everything that is not you. And slowly bring your attention back to objective reality. And when you open your eyes, also recognize that you are the subject, still the subject. Only what you're perceiving is now physical stuff. Okay, so I'd like to end the class today with a chant. I'm going to share my screen again. Let's do Yoga Atlova. That's I like this chant. So this, for those of you who are seeing this for the first time, this is a chant from the Bhaja Govindam, written also by Adi Shankara. It's a beautiful, the entire book is very beautiful, or the hymn is very beautiful, but this is one of my favorite verses. So, so whoever wants to chant can join me, or you can just listen to. Here we go. Yogarato va bhogarato va Yogarato va bhogarato va Sangarato va sangavihina Sangarato va sangavihina Yasya brahmani ramate chitta Yasya brahmani ramate chitta Nandati nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva. So this is the translation. Always wonderful to read this after your meditation and then take this out to the world, because it reminds you that if you can revel in the self, if your mind can go there where it just drops and just rests in the self, that's where all of bliss is. And if you can do that, if you have the capacity, if your mind has the capacity to do that, then you're free and you can enjoy anywhere at any time. So that's the potential of this work to get here, and I hope all of you get there. And yeah, that's the end of this class. I want to make sure that if you have to leave, you can leave. But I'm going to hang around for any questions or anything. But yeah, this is the end of the class.